Damaged Defenders by Sherza. Chapter 139. Remy. Remy flirted as easily as he breathed. That did not, though, mean he actually meant it the vast majority of the time. He learned long ago that flirting made for a very effective distraction tactic, especially with men, so long as you didn't make the mistake of flirting with a violent homophobe. Even some gay men didn't really know how to handle being flirted with by another man and flailed rather adorably. That having been said, the reason Remy was so comfortable with the flirting was because he didn't give a flying heck what gender his sex partners claimed as theirs. Remy got thoroughly delighted on those occasions he stumbled across someone who wasn't afraid to flirt outrageously right back at him, whether they meant it or not. Remy was rather like Loki, who practically squealed in glee when Tony flirted with him in that regard. Not that Loki would admit to being that thrilled, but it was kind of hard to miss. Jean-Paul Bibert had been one of the flirt-back types. He'd rather obviously been blindsided the first time the two groups had met, which had put him off his game. The expression on his face when both Loki and Remy had started flirting made that clear. Now, though, Jean-Paul had clearly decided the gauntlet had been thrown down. It was a blast. Jean-Paul had a rather wicked sense of humor and was proving to be pretty good at innuendo. Not to mention, Jean-Paul was bilingual and used it. It had been a while since Remy had been able to flirt with someone in French and have them truly understand what was being said rather than guessing due to context and maybe knowing a word or two. The heated looks made it pretty clear that at least some of the apparent attraction was genuine too, which, incidentally, was mutual. Jean-Paul wasn't exactly hard on the eyes. It wasn't like they were some grand love affair or something, of course, but Remy figured that if they could find the time in a private location, Jean-Paul would probably be quite happy to play. Definitely something to keep in mind. It had been a while since Remy had someone in his bed. He'd felt a little weird about that sort of thing, living in a school with a bunch of kids, some of whom were preteens and a few of whom hadn't even hit double digits yet. Not to mention that several of them were telepathic or empathic and not everyone had perfect control. So yeah, not so much with bringing someone to the school to have sex with. Despite what Jean liked to think, Remy did in fact have morals and a sense of right and wrong. Also, he wasn't anywhere near as stupid as she believed him to be either, which meant he'd very deliberately arranged for himself and Jean-Paul to be in the no man's land between Loki and Darcy and where the Jotuns were going to be teleported in. And despite the flirting, Remy was watching Loki very closely. Remy had been surprised to discover he could empathically read Thor. It wasn't consistent, and Remy had his suspicions that he was more reading Thor's body language than his actual emotions, Thor being anything but subtle. But yeah, he could read Thor sometimes. Loki, to absolutely no surprise on Remy's part whatever, was a total blank, empathically speaking. Though whether that was training, some sort of magical protection, his being an alien, or some combo of all three, was anyone's guess. At any rate, not being able to read him at all meant watching the guy like a hawk. Which most of the Avengers were doing. Because they all knew Loki had entire magazine stands, possibly an entire library, worth of issues regarding the whole Jotun thing. Jean-Paul was watching Loki too. Then again, so was the rest of Alpha Flight, since the Avengers had spread the word about the mess with Loki and Jotuns. Just the bare bones of the problem. In other words, that Loki had grown up being told they were basically evil incarnate, and then later found out he was one. They hadn't gone into the rest of the mess. Alpha Flight had, 201, been horrified at Odin's mess up. Well, they were horrified at whoever had pulled that stunt on Loki, since names hadn't been named. Honestly, Odin had better keep his head down until he died, because the list of people who wanted to kick his face in for his crap was ever growing. And not all of them had good self-control. Remarkably, Loki managed to keep it together for a while. Remy suspected that had as much to do with Darcy as anything else. She had been radiating concerned determination. among other things, like a fire hose on high, even before they'd landed, never mind disembarked and started mingling with Alpha Flight. She glued herself to Loki's side and hadn't left since. And she started talking, and didn't stop the moment the Jotuns arrived. Remy, like everyone else, did the rounds to greet everyone and learn names, both of the Vanir and the Jotuns. He was surprised to learn that Farbati wasn't in the group, nor were her other two kids. Instead, the apparent leader of the group of Jotuns was Devostra. The dude? Woman? Both? Remy had no idea. Had clearly been around a while because their skin was more gray than blue, and their body was crisscrossed with way too many scars to count. Also, unless Remy was imagining things, Devostra moved with the sort of slow, low-energy movements common to the very elderly. Given that Odin and Bestla, going by the vids they'd all seen of the Realm Tour, had both been showing signs of old age at 5,000 years old, give or take, Devostra was probably near the same age as them. It was kind of hard to say, though, because the sort of tribal hand-to-mouth life the Jotuns had been forced to live for so long tended to age folks before their time here on Earth, and Remy couldn't really see that being any different on another planet. Interestingly, the rest of the Jotun contingent didn't look too much younger than Devostra. Remy wondered what the deal was there for all of about 5 minutes before he asked Devostra.
Our people grow in the strength and skill of their magic as they age.
Devostra rumbled at him. Seriously, the being had a voice that sounded like it came from a sub-basement.
Our young can create ice knives and can freeze non-natives with a touch, which suffice for defense. Elders such as myself can construct nearly anything we can imagine out of ice.
Devostra had then demonstrated by doing something similar to what Remy had seen Bobby do. Create a little ice sculpture that fit in his hand. In this case, a miniature Jotun. But Remy had never seen Bobby create a sculpture that could move, nor did Bobby's creations have such fine detail. Remy could make out the little sculpture's fingernails, for heaven's sake. Not 5 minutes after that, Loki went nuclear. Focused as he'd been on Loki, Remy didn't see what set him off, but the guy went from more or less okay to homicidal, throwing off magic sparklies and teleporting to spank who or whatever had set him off in literally 2 seconds flat. Interestingly, he'd taken Darcy with him, and that woman was totally, utterly fearless because she didn't hesitate at all to try to talk Loki down despite the man looking unnervingly homicidal. Despite the dead seriousness of the situation, Remy couldn't quite restrain an amused snort when Darcy climbed up Loki's front in order to be eye to eye with him. That was amusing, despite the situation. Remy was so going to tease her about it later. Jean-Paul snickered, clearly agreeing that it was amusing looking, despite the situation. Then, stunningly, Loki calmed down. A minute or so after that, the two of them retreated to the jet, which could go. Remy knew they needed to get that out of the way. That is, Loki reacting badly to the presence of Jotuns. But whoa! Did not stop it from being more than a little terrifying. Nor did it stop it from being heartbreaking because... crap. Loki was, in fact, Jotun himself. Remy had a feeling it would be a few thousand years before Loki was willing to let himself look Jotun, never mind learning about or acting like one, which was just... yeah, there was a reason everyone wanted to kick Odin's butt. Well, that could have gone better, he commented to Jean-Paul, but it could also have gone a lot worse. At least Loki hadn't started tossing fireballs like he had at Farbati. Remy wasn't sure if that was because Frigga wasn't involved, Farbati wasn't involved, or Loki just wasn't on that sort of hair trigger, at least not today. Whatever it was, he was grateful. Jean-Paul snorted inelegantly. How long's that list now? He wanted to know, and Remy didn't mistake what he meant. Everybody here, the gang at the tower that didn't come, at least half the X-Men, and probably a few random people who've heard through the grapevine that I don't know about. Remy said. Oh, and Frigga. She already got some licks in, but I'm pretty sure she's not done kicking Odin's butt yet.
And for Botti, Balster, and Helblindi to the list.
The Vostr rumbled. They'd evidently been close enough to overhear Remy and Jumbo talking.
I am fairly sure Farbati wishes to drop Odin into the nebulous cavern.
Which, from the way they said it, was evidently the Jotun version of hell, or an actual geological feature of Jotunheim that scared its natives pantsless. Literally giving not a one of them more anything that could be termed pants. Yeah, I bet, Remy said with a nod. And again with feeling. Odin better keep his head down until he died, because there was a long list of folks that would like to make mincemeat of him. To Remy's surprise, about 20 or 30 minutes later, after they retreated to the jet, Darcy and Loki came back out. Loki was still looking like he'd sucked a rotten lemon, but he wasn't looking homicidal anymore. They also stayed close to the jet, and thus as far as was possible from the Jotuns. Remy was fairly sure that Loki was using Thor as something to hide behind. Probably not consciously, but Loki seemed to spend more time, more or less, behind Thor than anywhere else. Either that, or Loki was being a little shit and trying to annoy Thor and or play a prank on him. With Loki, it could very easily be either one. Or both at the same time. And Darcy would roll with all three options, provided the potential prank wasn't harmful, so her being there wasn't making it any easier to figure out which option it was. Eventually, the Jotuns, Vanir, and Alpha Flight seemed to be comfortable enough with each other to go do the tour of Canada, and thus where everyone would be stationed for the battle, solo. Which meant it was time for the Avengers to get back aboard the jet and head for Japan and the team there. Remy was looking forward to it. Shiro Yoshida might be a powerful mutant and utterly unwilling to see Japan subjugated by anyone, never mind some upstart aliens, which made him ideal to defend his country, but he was also... yeah, quite a piece of work. If you were enough of an asshole to get Charles Xavier, of all people, to sound put out, that was saying something, because Charles had the patience of a saint. He had to deal with a mansion full of kids and teenagers. But Charles had steadily been losing that calm demeanor whenever he mentioned Shiro when he was filling the gang in on how things were going with the mutant teams. And Loki had been looking progressively more and more like a cat about ready to bounce whenever Shiro and his shenanigans came up. Because it had been decided pretty much from the start that Loki would be the best one to knock Shiro down a peg or two without also pissing the man off irrevocably. Remy did not envy Shiro one bit what was coming at him. The best part of it was, because Loki's reputation came from Norse lore, Shiro had no clue whatsoever. Because as far as Shiro was concerned, Japan was the be-all, end-all of everything. Nothing that came from outside his borders was worth knowing or caring about. So Shiro would come at Loki like he came at everyone not Japanese, not realizing he was tangling with someone who may as well have written the book on verbal evisceration. It was going to be a glorious train wreck, especially if Shiro insisted on speaking Japanese, which was highly likely. Because why speak an inferior language? Remy was honestly surprised Shiro had bothered to learn to understand spoken English, but he evidently had. The all-speak thing that allowed the other realm residents to speak and understand any language came in real handy. Especially for situations like this.